When my wife passed away, her wealthy boss called me and said, "Booker, I found something. Come to my office right now." Then he added, "Do not tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in grave danger." When I got there and saw who was standing at the door, I froze, my blood turned to ice, and I realized my wife did not just die, she was taken from me. But before I tell you what I found in that office, you need to understand how the day of her funeral became the day my own son declared war on me. My name is Booker King, and I am 72 years old. I spent 40 years managing logistics in a warehouse, and before that I carried a rifle for this country. I know how to read a room, and I know when a storm is coming. But nothing prepared me for the storm that walked into St. Jude's Baptist Church that humid Tuesday morning. I sat in the front pew staring at the mahogany casket that held Esther, my Esther. We had been married for 45 years. She was a small woman with hands roughened by work, but a heart that could hold the world. For 3 decades, she had worked as the head housekeeper and personal assistant to Alistair Thorne, a man with more money than God, but who trusted only one person with his life, and that was my wife. The organ music was soft, a low hum that vibrated in my chest. The church was filling up with neighbors, people from the choir, and even some of Mr. Thorne's staff. Everyone was whispering respectful low tones. Everyone except the 2 people who should have been sitting right next to me. My son Terrence and his wife Tiffany were late, not 5 minutes late, 40 minutes late. The service had already begun when the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary banged open. I did not turn around, but I did not have to. I heard the sharp clack of high heels against the stone floor echoing like gunshots in a library. Heads turned. I could feel the collective intake of breath from the congregation. I kept my eyes fixed on the flowers atop Esther's casket. White lilies, her favorite. Then I smelled them before I saw them. A cloud of expensive cloying perfume that smelled like desperation and money mixed with the stale scent of cigarettes. Terrence slid into the pew beside me. He was wearing a bright cream-colored suit that looked like something a pimp would wear to a nightclub, not a son to his mother's funeral. He did not touch my shoulder. He did not squeeze my hand. He did not even look at the casket. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up in the dim church, illuminating his face. He was texting. His thumbs moved furiously and his jaw was tight. I glanced sideways. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. It was not from grief. It was the cold sweat of a man cornered. Tiffany squeezed in next to him. She was a white woman from a middle-class suburb who pretended she was born in a penthouse. She wore huge black sunglasses inside the church and a dress that was too short and too tight for the occasion. She fanned herself with a funeral program, looking around with open disdain. "This place is a sauna," she whispered loudly enough for the choir to hear. "Didn't they have money for AC?" "Shh," Terrence hissed, but he didn't put his phone away. I gripped the handle of my cane. It was a sturdy piece of hickory wood I had carved myself. My knuckles turned white. I wanted to tell them to leave. I wanted to tell them to show some respect for the woman who had paid for Terrence's college, who had paid for their wedding, who had bailed them out more times than I could count. But I said nothing. I was a man of discipline. I would not cause a scene at Esther's homegoing. The service ended and we moved to the fellowship hall for the repast. The church ladies had prepared the food Esther loved: fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, and cornbread. The smell was comforting to everyone else, but it seemed to offend Tiffany. She stood near the wall, holding a paper plate with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. I watched her from my seat in the corner. She leaned in close to Terrence, and I have hearing aids that I keep tuned very high. Most people think I am just an old deaf man, but I hear everything. "I can't believe we have to eat this grease," Tiffany hissed. My stomach is turning just looking at it. And look at these people. This whole thing is so cheap. Where did all her money go, Terrence? You said she had savings. She spent it on pills. Terrence muttered, his mouth full of food he had not bothered to bless. "Well, at least that expense is gone now," Tiffany said, and she let out a small, cruel laugh. "That is $500 a month back in our pockets." My heart stopped. Then it started beating again with a slow, heavy rhythm of pure rage. My wife was not even in the ground an hour, and they were celebrating the savings on her heart medication. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not from age, from the urge to wrap them around something. The room began to clear out. Neighbors came by to shake my hand to offer condolences. I nodded and thanked them, but my eyes never left my son. He was pacing by the exit, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Finally, when the last guest had left, Terrence walked over to me. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if I needed a ride home. He stood over me, blocking the light. "Dad," he said, his voice flat. "Where is the key to Mom's safe?" I looked up at him slowly. I saw the bags under his eyes, the twitch in his cheek. This was my boy, the boy I taught to fish, the boy Esther had rocked to sleep. Now he looked at me like I was an ATM that had swallowed his card. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice raspy. "The safe key," Terrence repeated louder this time. "Tiffany says Mom had a life insurance policy. We need to check the paperwork. We are entitled to 50% as next of kin." Tiffany stepped up beside him, crossing her arms. "We need to start the probate process immediately, Booker. Funerals are expensive and we have bills. We know Esther hoarded cash in the house." I stood up. It took me a moment. My knees were stiff. I leaned on my cane and looked them both in the eye. I am 6'2". Even bent with age, I towered over Tiffany. "Your mother is not even cold yet," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And you are asking for money." "It is not about money, it is about asset management," Terrence snapped. "Don't be difficult, Dad. We know you don't know how to handle finances. You just worked in a warehouse. Mom handled everything. We are just trying to help." "Help," I scoffed. "You are trying to scavenge. There is no money for you, Terrence. Not today." Terrence stepped closer, invading my personal space. His eyes were wild. "Listen to me, old man. You do not know what is going on. This house is in trouble. We are in trouble. If we do not find that money by the end of the week, things are going to get very bad." "What kind of bad?" I asked. "The kind where you end up on the street," Terrence spat. "Now give me the damn key or I will turn this house upside down until I find it myself." He reached for my pocket. I slapped his hand away with a speed that surprised us both. "Get out of my face," I growled. Tiffany gasped. "You are senile," she shrieked. "You are losing your mind. We should have you committed for your own safety." "We will discuss that later." Tiffany, Terrence said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Dad, you have until tonight. If I do not have that key, I am calling the social worker. I will tell them you are unfit to live alone. I will sell this house out from under you." He turned and stormed out. Tiffany shot me one last look of disgust before following him, her heels clicking away like a ticking clock. I stood alone in the fellowship hall. The silence was deafening. My own son. He was desperate. I had seen that look in the eyes of junkies and gamblers before. He was not just greedy, he was afraid. Suddenly my phone buzzed in my breast pocket. I pulled it out. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The screen was cracked, but I could read the name clearly. Mr. Alistair Thorne, Esther's boss, the billionaire who hadn't left his estate in 5 years. Why was he calling me? I answered. "Booker." His voice was not the smooth, commanding baritone I remembered. It was jagged, breathless. "Mr. Thorne," I started. "Listen to me, Booker." He cut me off. "I was going through the safe Esther kept here at my private office. She left something, a ledger, and a recording." I frowned. "A recording. Booker, you need to come to my estate right now. Do not go home. Do not tell Terrence. Do not tell that woman he married. If they know what I know, you will not survive the night." "What are you talking about, Mr. Thorne? They did not just wait for her to die," Booker Thorne whispered. "They helped her along." The room spun. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. "Come to the service entrance," Thorne said. "The gate is open. I have someone here you need to see." I hung up the phone. The grief that had been weighing me down evaporated. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I walked out of the church and climbed into my rusted 1990 Ford pickup truck. It was old and ugly, but the engine was strong, and in the glove box wrapped in an oily rag was my old service pistol. I checked the chamber, loaded. I was not just a widower anymore. I was a soldier entering enemy territory. And my son was the target. If you want to know what I found in the billionaire's office that made me almost drop my cane, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from, because this story is about to get a lot darker. I told Terrence I had to go see the pastor to settle the final bill for the service. It was a lie, but lies were the only currency my son understood anymore. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, but before I could turn the handle, a manicured hand slammed against the wood blocking my path. It was Tiffany. She was still wearing that black dress that was too tight, and her eyes were hidden behind those ridiculous sunglasses, even though we were inside a dim hallway. She held out a palm, her fingers wiggling expectantly. "Where do you think you are going, Booker?" she asked, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. To pay the church, I said, keeping my voice flat. You are not going anywhere without leaving the credit card, she said, stepping closer. I need to go buy supplies for the guests who might drop by later. We need wine. We need decent cheese. Not that garbage the church ladies served. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the way her eyes darted to my back pocket where my wallet was. She did not want cheese. She wanted to go to the mall. She wanted a new handbag to match her funeral attire. She wanted to swipe my card until the magnetic strip wore off, just like she had done to Esther for years. I reached into my pocket. Tiffany smiled a greedy little smirk that showed her teeth. I pulled out my wallet. Her hand twitched. I opened it and pulled out a single $20 bill. It was wrinkled and worn just like me. I let it drop from my fingers. It fluttered through the air and landed on the linoleum floor right between her expensive heels. Get some crackers, I said. Her mouth fell open. She looked at the money, then at me, her face turning a blotchy red. Is this a joke? She screeched. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, I said, stepping forward. She flinched. For a second the mask slipped and I saw the fear. She scrambled back, stepping aside to let me pass while her eyes stayed glued to the $20 on the floor. She would pick it up. I knew she would. She would pick it up the moment the door closed because greed has no pride. I walked out into the humid afternoon air and climbed into my 1990 Ford pickup. The door creaked a mournful sound as I pulled it shut. The cab smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. It was my sanctuary. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter, but it settled into a steady rhythm. This truck was like me, ugly on the outside, but it never quit. I backed out of the driveway, leaving my son and his wife to fight over the scraps in my house. As I drove down the street, the houses began to blur. I was not just driving to the other side of town, I was driving back in time. I thought about Esther. For 30 years, she had left our house at dawn and returned after dark. She took the bus to the north side to the gated estates where the driveways were longer than our entire block. She scrubbed floors, she polished silver, she organized lives that were not her own. To the world, she was just a housekeeper, a servant, invisible. But Esther saw everything. She knew where the skeletons were buried because she was the one dusting the closets. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles popping. My son Terrence thought I was just a tired old man who moved boxes in a warehouse. He forgot what I did before the warehouse. He forgot that Uncle Sam sent me to a jungle halfway across the world when I was just 18. You learn things in war. You learn that the quietest moments are the most dangerous. You learn to watch the grass for movement that shouldn't be there. You learn that when the enemy smiles, he is usually holding a knife behind his back. I had been watching Terrence and Tiffany for months. I noticed the new watch Terrence wore that cost more than my truck. I noticed the way Tiffany stopped leaving receipts on the counter. I noticed the way Esther had grown quiet in the weeks before she died, her eyes darting to the phone every time it rang. I had been trained to spot an ambush, but I never thought the enemy would be sleeping in the guest bedroom. I merged onto the highway, the old Ford vibrating under my hands. I checked my mirrors constantly. Old habits die hard. No one was following me. Terrence was too busy trying to find the safe key to notice I was gone. I took the exit for Highland Park. The air changed here. It smelled of fresh-cut grass and old money. The fences grew higher. The gates became more elaborate. I pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Thorne estate. A security camera buzzed and turned toward me. I rolled down the window. "Booker King," I said. The gate clicked and swung open silently. I drove up the winding paved driveway lined with oak trees that were older than the country itself. My rusted truck looked like a stain on a white sheet against the pristine landscaping. I parked next to a silver Rolls-Royce. The contrast would have made a lesser man feel small. It just made me feel focused. I got out and adjusted my suit jacket. It was a cheap suit bought off the rack 10 years ago, but I wore it with the posture of a man who answers to no one. The front door opened before I could knock. Alistair Thorne stood there. He was 80 years old, confined to a wheelchair, his body withered by time and illness, but his eyes were as sharp as broken glass. He wore a velvet smoking jacket and a silk scarf. He did not look at me like the help. He did not look at me like a charity case. He looked at me like a man who was about to go into battle and was glad to see another soldier. "Booker," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Mr. Thorne?" I nodded. He extended a hand. It was thin and trembling, but his grip was surprisingly strong. We did not shake hands like businessmen. We clasped hands like brothers. "I am sorry about Esther," he said. She was the finest woman I ever knew. Better than me, better than all of us. Thank you, sir, I said, my throat tight. Come inside, Thorne said, spinning his wheelchair around. We do not have much time. Your son will figure out you are gone soon. I followed him into the foyer. The floors were marble. The ceilings soared 20 feet high. It was a palace. But it felt cold, empty. Esther had been the warmth in this house. Without her, it was just a museum. We went past the grand staircase, past the formal dining room where a long table sat empty, and down a hallway lined with portraits of dead ancestors who looked down at me with disapproval. I stared right back at them. I had buried more men than they had ever met. Thorne led me to his private study at the back of the house. It was a room I had never been in. The walls were lined with leather-bound books. The air smelled of cedar and brandy. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out the afternoon sun, casting the room in shadow. But we were not alone. Standing by the fireplace was a man I did not recognize. He was tall, wearing a trench coat that looked like it had seen better days. He had a scar running down his cheek and eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of a bottle and the bottom of humanity. Booker, this is Mr. Vance, Thorne said. He is a private investigator. Esther hired him 2 months ago. My heart skipped a beat. Esther hired a PI. Why? Vance nodded at me. He didn't smile. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. Please sit down, Thorne said, gesturing to a heavy leather chair in front of his massive oak desk. I sat. The leather creaked. I felt like I was sitting in the electric chair waiting for the switch to be thrown. Thorne wheeled himself behind the desk. He placed his hands on a stack of items sitting in the center of the green blotter. There was a small black leather journal. I recognized it immediately. It was Esther's prayer journal. She carried it everywhere. And next to it was a thick envelope filled with photographs. I found this in the safe Esther kept here, Thorne said softly. She had her own combination. I never asked what was in it. I trusted her completely. But after she passed, I knew I had to look. I had to make sure her affairs were in order. He pushed the journal toward me. Open it, Booker. Read the last entry. My hands shook as I reached for the book. The leather was warm as if she had just been holding it. I opened it to the bookmark. The handwriting was hers, neat and looping, but the ink was shaky as if she had been writing in a hurry or in fear. I read the words. Terrence asked for money again. I told him no. He looked at me with eyes I did not recognize. He looked at me like he hated me. I found the pills in his jacket pocket today. They look just like my heart medication. But they aren't. I am scared, Booker. I am scared of our son. I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt. I couldn't breathe. Mr. Vance spoke up, then his voice gravelly. Look at the photos, Mr. King. I reached for the envelope. I poured the contents onto the desk. Dozens of photos spilled out. They were grainy, taken with a long-range lens, but the subjects were clear. There was Terrence. He was standing in an alleyway talking to a man with tattoos on his neck. He was handing over a thick wad of cash. There was another photo, Terrence and Tiffany sitting in a car. Tiffany was laughing, holding up a bottle of champagne. But the last photo made me freeze. It felt like a physical blow to the chest. It was taken through the kitchen window of my own house. It was taken 3 nights ago. The timestamp said 2 a.m. In the photo, Terrence was standing at the kitchen counter. He was holding 2 orange prescription bottles. One was Esther's heart medication. The other was unlabeled. He was pouring the pills from one bottle into the other. He was smiling. I stared at the image. My son, my flesh and blood, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had taught to tie his shoes. He was switching the pills. He killed her, I whispered. The words felt like gravel in my mouth. He killed his own mother. Thorne leaned forward, his face grim. He did not just kill her, Booker. He executed her. And now he is coming for you. Why, I asked, looking up, my eyes burning but dry. Why would he do this? Thorne pointed to the journal again. Turn the page, Booker. Look at what she was hiding from you. Look at what she was hiding from everyone. I turned the page, and there, pasted into the book, was a bank statement. The balance was not a few $1,000s. It was not even $100,000. It was $3 million. My Esther, the housekeeper. The woman who clipped coupons and darned my socks. She was a millionaire. And Terrence knew. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. He didn't kill her because he hated her. He killed her because he was greedy. He killed her for a payday. I stood up. The chair fell backward with a crash. I am going to kill him, I roared. I reached for my back waistband where the cold steel of my pistol pressed against my spine. I am going to go back there and I am going to put a bullet in his head. No, Thorne shouted. His voice cracked like a whip. I stopped, panting my hand on the gun. If you kill him now, you go to prison and he wins, Vance said, stepping forward, his hands raised. You will rot in a cell and Tiffany will spend that money on vacations and jewelry. Is that what Esther would want? I looked at the photo of my son. The monster. Then what do? I asked, my voice breaking. We trap him, Thorne said. His eyes were cold and hard. We make him confess. We make him destroy himself. But to do that, you have to go back there. Go back, I asked. To that house. With him. Yes, Thorne said. You have to go back. You have to play the grieving, confused old man. You have to make him think he has won. You have to make him think you are weak. Can you do that, Booker? Can you look the man who murdered your wife in the eye and pretend you do not know? I looked at the journal. I looked at the photos. I thought about Esther. I thought about the fear she must have felt in those final days. I took a deep breath. I straightened my jacket. I picked up my cane. I was a soldier once. I know how to follow orders. And I know how to wait for the kill shot. I will do it, I said. Thorne nodded. Good. Now listen carefully. Here is what we are going to do. And as he laid out the plan, I felt the old soldier inside me waking up. My son thought he was a predator. He thought I was prey. He was about to find out that he had walked into the den of a lion. Thorne pushed the small black leather journal across the mahogany desk toward me. It smelled of lavender, the scent Esther always wore. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was hers, neat loops I had known for 45 years, but the words were strangers to me. I started reading. March 12th. Mr. Thorne's portfolio is up 12% this quarter. My recommendations on the tech startups paid off. I stared at the page. Recommendations. My Esther. The woman who clipped coupons for canned corn was giving investment advice to a billionaire. I looked up at Thorne. He nodded. Esther was not just my housekeeper, Booker. She was my financial compass. She had a gift. She saw patterns in the market no one else saw. Over 30 years, I paid her a commission on every successful trade. I turned the page. A bank statement was pasted there. The balance made my breath hitch. $3 million. My wife was a millionaire. She had built a fortune in silence, scrubbing floors by day and studying markets by night. But as I flipped forward, the tone of the entries changed. The ink became jagged. January 4th. I found another withdrawal. $2,000. The signature looks like mine, but the loop on the E is wrong. It is Terrence. I know it is him. February 10th. $5,000 this time. I confronted him. He denied it. He screamed at me. He said I owed him. I looked at the total loss calculated at the bottom of the page. $50,000 in 2 years. My son had been bleeding his mother dry while driving a leased Mercedes and wearing Italian suits. The shame burned in my chest hotter than the grief. She never told me. She carried this burden alone to protect me from the truth about our boy. She died trying to save our savings from his greed. Vance, the private investigator, stepped forward, his trench coat rustling. He laid out a series of high-resolution photographs on the desk. They were taken with a night vision lens, grainy and green, but clear enough to stop my heart. Mr. King, look at the timestamp. 2:14 a.m. 3 days before your wife passed. The photo showed my kitchen. The checkered curtains Esther sewed herself were visible. And there was Terrence. He was standing by the counter where Esther kept her daily pill organizer. In his hand he held a small amber vial. It looked identical to her heart medication. But in the next photo he was pouring the contents of that vial into her organizer and pocketing her real pills. Vance pointed a calloused finger at the image. We analyzed the trash from your curb the next morning. We found the vial he threw away. It did not contain beta blockers. It contained a concentrated stimulant, a high-grade amphetamine mixture, dangerous enough to cause cardiac arrest in a healthy man, fatal for someone with your wife's condition. Thorne spoke up, his voice like gravel. It was not a heart attack, Booker. It was murder. Calculated, cold-blooded murder. He waited until her prescription was low, then he made the switch. He knew exactly what he was doing. He watched her take those pills. He watched her die. And he did it for money. He did it because she was about to cut him off. I looked at the photo of my son. His face was illuminated by the refrigerator light. He was not crying. He was not hesitating. He was smirking. The monster who lived in my house. The boy I taught to ride a bike. He had poisoned the woman who gave him life because he wanted a payout. He traded his mother's life for a gambling debt. It was not natural causes. It was an execution carried out in our own kitchen. A sound escaped my throat. It was a low, guttural roar of pure animal pain. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the desk so hard the wood creaked, my vision blurred with red-hot tears. I stood up, knocking the heavy leather chair backward. I could feel the weight of the service pistol in the glove box of my truck. It was calling to me. I needed it. I needed to feel the recoil. I needed to see the fear in his eyes that Esther must have felt. I am going to kill him. The words tore out of my throat, raw and bleeding. I am going to drive back there, and I am going to put him down like a rabid dog. He does not deserve to breathe. He does not deserve a trial. He took my Esther. He took my life. I turned toward the door, my hand reaching for the handle. I was not a father anymore. I was an executioner. I could see it all in my mind. The kick of the door, the look on Tiffany's face, the final judgment delivered in lead. Justice. Immediate and permanent. My blood was boiling, screaming for vengeance. Stop! Thorne's voice cracked through the air like a whip. He slammed his hand on the desk. Booker, stop. If you walk out that door with a gun, you lose everything. You go to prison for the rest of your life, and Terrence wins. He becomes the victim. He inherits the house. He inherits the money. Tiffany spends every dime Esther saved while you rot in a cell. Is that what you want? Is that what Esther would want? I froze my hand on the doorknob, my chest heaving. Vance stepped between me and the door. We do not have enough for a conviction yet, Booker. The vial in the trash is circumstantial. The photos show him touching the pills, but not what was in them. A defense lawyer would tear it apart. We need more. We need him to say it. We need a confession. Thorne wheeled himself closer, his eyes burning into mine. You have to go back there. You have to walk into that house and look at the man who killed your wife and smile. You have to play the part Booker. Be the grieving, confused old man they think you are. Let them believe they have won. Let them get comfortable. Because when they are comfortable, they will make mistakes. And when they slip, we will be there to catch them. Can you do that? Can you be a soldier one last time? I drove back to my house in my old Ford pickup, and the steering wheel felt like it was made of ice under my grip. The engine hummed a low, steady rhythm that usually calmed me, but today, it sounded like a funeral dirge. I checked my rearview mirror not to see the traffic behind me, but to look at my own face. Thorne had told me to play the part. He told me to be the grieving, confused old man my son thought I was. I tried to smile. I tried to cultivate a look of weakness and senility. But the face staring back at me was hard. The lines around my mouth were etched deep with a rage so potent it tasted like battery acid. I had to soften my eyes. I had to slump my shoulders. I had to bury the soldier who wanted to strangle his enemy and resurrect the father who was lost in grief. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than boot camp. Harder than the war. Because the enemy wasn't a stranger across a jungle clearing. The enemy was the boy I had taught to catch a baseball. The enemy was the man who had sat at my dinner table and eaten my food while planning my wife's murder. Every mile marker I passed felt like a step closer to hell. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. The sheer physical disgust of facing him was almost overwhelming. I wanted to turn the truck around. I wanted to keep driving until the gas ran out, but I couldn't. Esther needed me. Justice needed me. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment, breathing in the scent of old tobacco and dust, gathering the strength to walk into the house that was no longer a home. I stepped onto the porch, and the front door was already ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the violation of it. This was Esther's sanctuary. She kept it spotless. She kept it sacred. Now the door hung open like a broken jaw. I stepped into the foyer, and the sound hit me first. It was a tearing sound, wet and sharp, like flesh being ripped from bone. I walked into the living room and stopped. The air was thick with dust and feathers. Tiffany was on her knees in the center of the room. In her hand she held a yellow box cutter. She was attacking Esther's favorite floral sofa, the one she had saved for 3 years to buy. Tiffany was slashing the cushions open one by one, plunging her hands into the stuffing and ripping it out in great white handfuls. She looked like a wild animal. Her hair was wild, her dress was stained with dust, and she was muttering to herself, "Where is it? Where is the cash?" She did not even see me. She tossed a cushion aside and stabbed the back of the sofa, slicing the fabric with a violent hiss. The floor was littered with papers, books pulled from shelves, and shattered knickknacks. It looked like a tornado had touched down inside my living room. But then I heard another sound coming from down the hall. A high-pitched mechanical whine, a drill. My stomach dropped. The master bedroom. Our bedroom. I walked down the hallway, my cane tapping softly on the hardwood. The pictures on the walls were crooked. Our wedding photo was lying on the floor, the glass cracked over Esther's smiling face. I stepped over it, careful not to crush her image. The whining sound grew louder, grinding against my nerves. I pushed open the bedroom door. The room was unrecognizable. The dresser drawers were pulled out and dumped on the bed. Esther's clothes, her Sunday dresses, her nightgowns were trampled underfoot. And there in the corner was Terrence. He was sweating through his cream-colored suit. He was holding a heavy-duty power drill, pressing it with all his weight against the small wall safe Esther had hidden behind the painting of the Last Supper. The painting was thrown in the corner. Terrence was grunting, his face twisted in a mask of pure greed. He leaned into the drill, the bit screeching against the metal lock. Smoke rose from the friction, filling the room with the smell of burning steel. He wasn't looking for documents. He wasn't looking for keepsakes. He was looking for the payout he believed he was owed. I needed to get his attention. I needed to stop the desecration before I lost control and did something that would ruin the plan. I let my body go slack. I allowed my knees to buckle slightly. I loosened my grip on my hickory cane and let it fall. It hit the floor with a loud clatter that cut through the noise of the drill like a gunshot. Terrence jumped. The drill slipped, screeching across the metal door of the safe and gouging the wall. He spun around, wild-eyed. His chest was heaving. His eyes were red-rimmed and frantic. He looked at me, and for a second he didn't see his father. He saw an intruder. He saw an obstacle. Then recognition dawned, but it brought no shame, only anger. He dropped the drill onto the pile of Esther's clothes. He pointed a shaking finger at the open safe. "It is empty," he screamed, his voice cracked with hysteria. "Empty. There is nothing in here but dust. Where is it? Where is the money? Where are the bonds?" I stared at him, letting my mouth hang open slightly, feigning the confusion of a man whose world has stopped making sense. I leaned against the doorframe, clutching my chest, as if my heart were failing. I did not speak. I just looked at the empty safe, then back at him, letting the silence stretch, letting his panic grow. He kicked the bed frame hard. "Don't look at me like that, old man," he shouted. "You knew, didn't you? You knew she moved it. You and her were always whispering, always hiding things from me." Terrence marched across the room, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. He was big. He had played football in high school, and he used that size now to intimidate. He grabbed the front of my jacket, bunching the cheap fabric in his fist, and shoved me back against the doorframe. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath mixed with the acrid scent of his fear. He reached down and picked up the power drill again. He revved it once, the sound sharp and menacing right next to my ear. He held the spinning bit inches from my face. The metal blurred a gray spiral of potential violence. "Tell me," he hissed, his spit landing on my cheek. "Tell me where the old hag hid the money, or I swear to God I will drill the answer out of your skull. Speak, old man. Where is the inheritance?" The drill bit spun inches from my nose, a blur of gray steel that smelled of ozone and violence. Terrence was breathing hard, his eyes wide with a madness that had consumed him whole. I felt the heat radiating from the motor against my cheek. My heart was already hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and fear, but I knew I had to weaponize it. Thorne's words echoed in my mind, clear and commanding. "Buy time, Booker. Play the victim. Do not let him kill you before we have the proof." I looked into my son's eyes, and I saw no recognition there, only the cold stare of a stranger who wanted something I possessed. He shouted again, demanding the location of money that didn't exist in that safe. I knew if I stayed standing, he would use that drill. He was past the point of reason. I let my eyelids flutter. I allowed my jaw to go slack. I reached up with a trembling hand and clutched at the fabric of my shirt right over my heart. I forced the air out of my lungs in a ragged, wheezing gasp that sounded like a dying engine. My knees buckled for real this time as I let gravity take me. I slid down the doorframe, my back scraping against the wood until I hit the floor with a heavy thud. I curled into myself, groaning low in my throat, my hand clawing at the carpet. It wasn't entirely acting. The stress, the grief, the sheer physical threat had spiked my blood pressure to dangerous levels. I could feel the room spinning. Terrence stepped back, the drill still whirring in his hand, his expression shifting from aggression to sudden panic. He wasn't worried about losing his father. He was worried about losing the combination to the safe. He backed away, the tool winding down with a mechanical whine, leaving a ringing silence in the room broken only by my staged, desperate gasps for air. Tiffany appeared in the doorway, her hair wild and her black funeral dress covered in white feathers from the decimated sofa. She took one look at me writhing on the floor and dropped the box cutter she had been using to eviscerate my furniture. Her face went pale, not with concern but with calculation. "Do not let him die," she screeched, rushing forward and grabbing Terrence's arm with a grip that looked painful. "If he dies now, we lose everything, Terrence. He is the only one who knows where the assets are. If he croaks, that money disappears into the system. Think, you idiot." Terrence looked down at me, then at the drill in his hand. He cursed loudly and tossed the tool onto the bed where it landed on Esther's Sunday hat. He knelt beside me, grabbing my collar with both hands and shaking me violently. His head snapped back and forth. "Wake up, old man," he shouted, his spit flying onto my face. "You do not get to die yet, not until you tell me where the money is." He raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sting was sharp and hot, but I kept my eyes half closed, focusing on my breathing, making it shallow and irregular. I let my head loll to the side. I needed to give them a number big enough to blind them, a number big enough to make them keep me alive. I licked my dry lips and whispered, "The trust." Terrence froze. He leaned in closer, his ear almost touching my mouth. "What trust? Say it again." I wheezed, forcing the words out between gasps. "The trust fund. Esther set it up. $2 million. The lawyer. He comes next week." I let my head fall back against the floorboards as if the effort of speaking had drained the last of my life force. I watched through slit eyes as Terrence looked up at Tiffany. A slow, greedy smile spread across his face, erasing the panic. $2 million, he whispered, testing the weight of the words. The number hung in the air like a spell. $2 million. It was enough to fix his gambling debts, enough to buy Tiffany her silence, enough to fuel their delusions for a lifetime. I saw the transformation in my son. The murderer vanished, replaced by the opportunist. He did not see a dying father anymore. He saw a winning lottery ticket that needed to be kept safe until cashing day. He grabbed me under the arms and hauled me up. He was not gentle. He dragged me toward the bed, kicking Esther's clothes out of the way. He threw me onto the mattress, my body bouncing on the springs. He stood over me, panting, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "We have to keep him alive," Tiffany said, pacing the room. "Just until next week. Just until the lawyer comes and we can get him to sign it over. We need to make sure he doesn't talk to anyone else." Terrence nodded. He reached into my jacket pocket. I tensed, but I did not resist. He pulled out my smartphone. It was a new model Esther had bought me for my birthday so I could see pictures of the grandkids. He looked at it, then looked at me. "You won't be needing this," he said. "You need rest, Dad. Lots of rest." He slipped the phone into his own pocket, cutting off my lifeline to the outside world. He walked backward out of the room, his eyes never leaving mine. He looked like a zookeeper locking a dangerous animal in its cage. Tiffany followed him, casting one last suspicious glance at me before disappearing into the hallway. The door slammed shut. The heavy thud vibrated through the floorboards. Then came the sound that sealed my fate. The metallic slide of the deadbolt. The sharp click of the lock engaging. I was a prisoner in the house I had paid for with 40 years of sweat. I lay still on the bed, listening to their footsteps retreating down the hall, listening to them whispering about millions that didn't exist, planning a future they would never see. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the silence to settle before I dared to move. They thought they had taken my phone. They thought they had cut me off. They didn't know about the loose floorboard under the bed or what was hidden beneath it. 2 days passed in that stifling room, and the air grew heavy with the scent of my own sweat and the lingering perfume of Esther that still clung to the curtains. The sun crawled across the floorboards, marking time like a prisoner scratching tally marks on a wall. I sat in the armchair facing the window, watching the world go on without me. The neighbor walked his dog, and the mailman delivered bills. None of them knew that inside the yellow house on Elm Street, an old man was rotting in captivity. Twice a day, the lock would click and the door would open just a crack. Tiffany would slide a plastic plate across the floor with her foot like she was feeding a stray mongrel. The first meal was a sandwich made with bread that was blooming with green mold on the crust. The cheese was hard and sweating oil. The water was lukewarm tap water in a dirty glass. "Eat up, old man," she would sneer through the crack. We are cutting costs until the trust fund clears. I looked at the food and my stomach churned. Every instinct screamed to throw it back at her to starve rather than accept her insults. But I was a soldier. Soldiers do not starve out of pride. Soldiers eat whatever they can find to keep the machine running. I picked off the mold with shaking fingers. I ate the dry bread. I drank the water. I needed my strength. I did push-ups against the wall when they were asleep. I paced the room to keep the blood flowing in my legs. I was not just surviving, I was preparing. I was sharpening my mind and my body for the moment the door would open wide. Night fell like a heavy blanket suffocating the house. The structure settled into silence, but it was a restless quiet, filled with the creaks and groans of old wood. I pressed my ear against the wood of the door. The house was old, built in the 1920s, and the ventilation ducts carried sound like a telephone wire. I heard heavy footsteps pacing in the living room. Back and forth, the sound of a trapped animal pacing its cage. Then the ring of a cell phone shattered the silence. Terrence answered on the first ring. His voice was low, but the desperation made it carry through the thin walls. I strained to listen, deciphering the words through the wood. "Please listen to me, Marco," I heard him plead. "I have the money coming. It is a trust fund. My mother left it. No, do not send anyone to the house. I swear on my life I will have it." There was a pause. A long, terrifying silence where I could almost hear the voice on the other end delivering a death sentence. Then Terrence spoke again, his voice cracking with tears. $500,000 is a lot of cash to move in 2 days. I need more time. Just give me a week. Please, Marco, I lost it on the spread, but I can make it back. Do not touch my legs. I heard a sob, a grown man crying to a gangster. I understood then. It was not just greed, it was survival. My son had gambled away $500,000 betting on football games he didn't understand. He was deep in the hole with the kind of men who didn't send late notices. They sent men with baseball bats and pliers. The deadline was 3 days. If he didn't pay, he was a dead man walking. And I was his collateral. He needed that $2 million, not to buy a yacht, but to buy his life. He was going to squeeze me until I signed, or until I died because he had a gun to his head. I slid down the door until I hit the floor. My son was not just a murderer, he was a desperate fool, and desperate fools are the most dangerous creatures on earth. I waited until I heard Terrence pass out on the couch, the clinking of a bottle against a glass telling me he was drinking away his terror. I crawled toward the bed. Esther had been a brilliant woman. She anticipated storms before the first cloud appeared. Years ago, when Terrence first started stealing small amounts, she hired a carpenter to install a false bottom in the floorboard under her side of the bed. She told me it was for jewelry. I knew it was for emergencies. I pushed the heavy mattress aside with a grunt. My muscles burned, but I ignored the pain. I found the loose board and pried it up with the handle of a metal spoon I had hidden from my dinner tray. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay my salvation. A Nokia brick phone fully charged and turned off. And beside it the cold, heavy weight of a .38 snub-nose revolver. I checked the cylinder. 5 rounds. Enough to end this. But Thorne was right. I needed justice, not just blood. I turned on the phone. The screen glowed green in the darkness. I typed a message to the number Thorne had given me using a simple code we agreed on. "The wolf is at the door. Debt is 500 large. Deadline 3 days. Need extraction." I waited. The minutes ticked by like hours. I watched the battery indicator. I watched the signal bars. Then the phone buzzed against my palm. A single text message. It read, "Lawyer Solomon Gold arrives at 900 hours tomorrow. He has the paperwork. Get ready to play your part. Do not break character. We are coming for you." I turned off the phone and hid it back under the floorboard. I slid the gun under my pillow. I lay back in the dark and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow the curtain would rise. I closed my eyes and practiced my tremors. Tomorrow I would be the frail old man they wanted to see. But inside I was already pulling the trigger. The sun came up like a judgment I wasn't ready to face, but the click of the deadbolt told me showtime had started. The door swung open, and for the first time in 2 days, I wasn't greeted with a sneer or a kick. Tiffany stood there, holding a steaming mug of coffee, her face plastered with a smile that looked like it hurt. "Good morning, Dad," she chirped, her voice an octave higher than usual. "We have a guest. You need to look presentable." She handed me the mug. It said, "World's Best Grandpa" on the side. The irony tasted bitter, but I drank the coffee because I needed the caffeine to sharpen my edges. Terrence appeared behind her wearing a fresh suit and a tie that was too tight. He looked like a man trying to sell a car with no engine. He grabbed my arm not to hurt me this time, but to steady me. "Easy there, old-timer," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Let's get you to the living room. Mr. Gold is here." They walked me down the hallway like I was a piece of fragile china they were afraid to drop. I leaned heavily on my cane, shuffling my feet, playing the part of the confused invalid perfectly. In the living room sat a man who looked like he could foreclose on your house just by looking at it. Solomon Gold was not a large man, but he took up all the space in the room. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my first house, and his eyes were black marbles behind rimless glasses. He didn't stand when I entered. He just watched me like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Mr. King," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I am Solomon Gold. I represent your late wife's estate. Please sit." Terrence guided me to the armchair, the one Tiffany hadn't slashed to ribbons yet. He sat next to me, perched on the edge of the cushion, his knee bouncing with a nervous energy that shook the floorboards. Tiffany sat on the arm of his chair, playing the devoted daughter-in-law. We were a picture-perfect family if you ignored the smell of desperation and the hidden gun under my mattress. Gold opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a single thick document bound in blue paper. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Terrence, then at me. "Mrs. King was a very prudent woman," he began. "She set up a living trust 3 years ago. The assets within that trust, including the investment portfolio and the offshore accounts, total approximately $3 million. Terrence made a noise in his throat like a dying engine. His eyes bulged. $3 million. He looked at Tiffany, and I saw the greed wash over them, erasing the fear for a split second. Gold continued, ignoring my son's reaction. "According to the terms of the trust, upon her death, the entirety of the estate transfers to her husband, Booker King." Terrence nodded eagerly, reaching out to pat my shoulder. "That is right," he said, his palm sweating against my jacket. "Dad is the beneficiary. We are just here to help him manage it." Gold raised a hand, stopping him. "There is a condition, Mr. King." Esther was very specific. She included a competency clause. Because of the significant value of the assets, the beneficiary must be certified as being of sound mind and body by a medical professional before he can access a single cent or sign any checks. Terrence froze. His hand stopped patting my shoulder. Gold leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave. "If the beneficiary is found to be incompetent, senile, or unable to make rational decisions, the trust automatically locks. The assets are frozen and placed into a high-yield holding account for a period of 10 years to ensure their protection. During that time, no one, not even family members or legal guardians, can access the principal amount." 10 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched the blood drain from Terrence's face. He didn't have 10 years. He didn't have 10 days. He had Marco and the guys with baseball bats waiting for him. He needed that money today. The trap Thorne and I had built was simple. We knew they wanted to declare me incompetent to steal the money, so we made competence the key to the vault. Tiffany apparently didn't understand the gravity of the timeline. She was still sticking to the original script, the one where they threw me in a home and went shopping. She let out a dramatic sigh and shook her head sadly. "Oh, Mr. Gold, that is such a shame," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We have been so worried about Booker lately. He has been forgetting things. He leaves the stove on. He talks to people who aren't there. Just yesterday, he didn't even know where he was. I don't think he can pass a competency test. It might be best for everyone if we just accept that the trust needs to be frozen, or maybe you can transfer guardianship to Terrence." She looked at Gold, expecting him to nod sympathetically. Instead, Gold started to close the folder. "I see," he said, reaching for the clasp. "If that is the case, I will have to file the paperwork to lock the assets immediately. It is for his own protection, of course. We can revisit the status of the trust in a decade." The lock clicked shut. The sound was like a gunshot to Terrence. He jumped up from his chair, knocking Tiffany sideways. "No!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Shut up, Tiffany! You do not know what you are talking about!" He turned to Gold, his hands waving frantically. "She is exaggerating. Dad is fine. He is just grieving. Look at him. He is sharp as a tack. He remembers everything." "Don't you, Dad?" He grabbed my shoulder again, digging his fingers in hard enough to bruise. "Tell him, Dad. Tell him you are fine. Tell him you are not crazy." I looked at my son. I saw the sweat running down his temple. I saw the terror in his eyes. He was begging me to be sane so he could rob me. It was pathetic. I looked at Gold and blinked slowly. "I feel fine," I said, my voice shaky but clear. "I just miss my Esther." Gold looked at me, then at Terrence, then back at the file. He tapped his fingers on the leather case, considering. "Very well," he said. "If you insist he is competent, we can proceed. But I need proof. I cannot release $3 million on your word alone." He pulled a card from his pocket. "I have scheduled a comprehensive medical evaluation for tomorrow morning at 9. It is with an independent physician. If Mr. King passes, he gets the checkbook. If he fails, the vault locks for 10 years. Do we have an understanding?" Terrence let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Yes," he said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Yes, we understand. Dad will be there. He will pass. I promise." Gold stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Good day, gentlemen." He walked out the door, leaving a silence behind him that was heavy with threat. Terrence turned to me. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, dark resolve. He smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb. "You are going to be the healthiest man in the world tomorrow, Dad," he whispered. "I am going to make sure of it." Night fell over the house like a shroud, and the air inside grew thick with the smell of roasting meat and impending violence. For the first time in the 10 years she had lived under my roof, Tiffany was cooking. She was not heating up takeout. She was not throwing frozen nuggets into the microwave. She was actually cooking. The aroma of pot roast and potatoes filled the kitchen, masking the scent of bleach she had used to scrub the floor earlier. It was a performance, a domestic scene staged for an audience of one. Me. Terrence sat at the kitchen table, drumming his fingers on the wood. His leg bounced up and down, a nervous tic he had developed since the phone call with Marco. He watched me like a hawk watches a dying rabbit. I sat in my usual spot, my hands folded over the head of my cane, trying to look frail, trying to look like I wasn't calculating the distance to the back door. Tiffany hummed as she moved around the stove. It was a cheerful tune that sounded grotesque in the silence of the house. She was wearing an apron over her designer clothes, playing the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law. "Dinner is almost ready, Dad," she chirped, turning to flash me a smile that showed too many teeth. "We made your favorite. Pot roast with extra gravy. We need you strong for tomorrow. You have to pass that test with flying colors so we can get this trust sorted out and take care of you properly." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes dull. "Thank you, Tiffany," I mumbled. "That is very kind of you. It is the least we can do," she said, turning back to the counter. "We just want you to be happy. We want you to be comfortable." I watched her back. I watched the way her shoulders tensed. I knew that posture. It was the posture of a soldier planting a mine. I shifted in my chair, angling my body toward the dark window that looked out onto the backyard. Outside, it was pitch black. The glass had turned into a mirror, reflecting the kitchen behind me with perfect clarity. I did not look at Tiffany directly. I looked at her ghost in the glass. She thought I was staring at my own reflection, lost in the dementia she claimed I had. But I was watching her hands. She reached into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a small white paper packet. It looked like the kind of envelope a street corner dealer hands you through a car window. She glanced over her shoulder at me. I let my jaw hang slack and stared blankly at the window. She turned back to the stove, satisfied that I was gone mentally. In the reflection, I saw her tear the packet open. She tipped it over the bowl of soup she had set aside for me. A fine white powder cascaded into the dark broth, dissolving instantly. She stirred it vigorously, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. 1 stir, 2 stirs, 3, mixing the death into the dinner. She wasn't just seasoning my food, she was spiking it. I remembered the conversation I had overheard. We switch her medications, we tell her she did things she didn't do. But this was different. They needed me lucid for the doctor tomorrow, didn't they? Or maybe they didn't. Maybe the plan had changed. Maybe they realized I was too much of a risk. Maybe they planned to drag a drugged, drooling version of me to a crooked doctor who would sign anything for cash. Or maybe they just wanted to make sure I slept through the night so I couldn't escape. Whatever was in that bowl, I knew one thing for certain. It was not a vitamin. She picked up the bowl and turned around, her face composed into a mask of maternal care. "Here we go, Dad," she said, setting the steaming bowl in front of me. "Eat up while it is hot. The gravy will do you good." I looked down at the brown liquid. It smelled savory, salty, and lethal. I looked at Terrence. He was watching me intently, his eyes locked on the spoon in my hand. "Eat, Dad," he urged, his voice tight. "You need the nutrition." I lifted the spoon. My hand trembled. I let the tremor grow worse, shaking the utensil until it rattled against the bowl. I lifted a spoonful toward my mouth. Terrence leaned forward, holding his breath. Tiffany wiped her hands on her apron, waiting. I brought the spoon to my lips, then let a violent spasm take over my arm. I jerked my hand sideways. The spoon hit the edge of the bowl hard. "Oops," I whispered. I swept my arm across the table in a clumsy arc, knocking the bowl completely over. It flew off the edge of the table and shattered on the linoleum floor. The soup splashed everywhere, coating the cabinets, the chair legs, and my shoes in a hot, sticky mess. "Oh no," I cried, my voice cracking. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry." Tiffany shrieked, jumping back to avoid the splash. "You stupid old man," she yelled, forgetting her role for a second. "Look what you did." Terrence stood up, his face red. "It is okay," he said through gritted teeth, forcing himself to stay calm. "It was an accident. Tiffany, clean it up. We will get him another bowl." But before Tiffany could move, a low growling sound came from under the table. It was precious Tiffany's prize-winning English bulldog. The dog waddled out from the living room, attracted by the smell of the meat. "Precious, no," Tiffany shouted, reaching for the dog's collar. But the dog was fast for a creature that weighed 50 pounds. She lunged for the puddle of gravy, lapping it up with greedy, enthusiastic noises. She licked the floor tiles clean, ingesting the soup, the powder, the secret ingredient, all in a matter of seconds. "Get away from there!" Tiffany screamed, kicking at the dog. It was too late. The bowl was licked clean. I watched the dog. Terrence watched the dog. Tiffany stood frozen, a roll of paper towels in her hand, her eyes wide with horror. For a moment, nothing happened. Precious looked up, licking her chops, wagging her stub of a tail, waiting for more. Then she sneezed. It started as a sneeze, then a cough, then a high-pitched wheeze. The dog's legs stiffened. She fell onto her side, kicking the air as if she were running in a dream. Foam white and pink bubbled from her jowls. Her eyes rolled back into her head, showing the whites. Tiffany dropped to her knees, screaming the dog's name. She tried to hold the animal, but Precious was thrashing violently, her claws scratching the linoleum. 1 minute passed. The thrashing slowed. 2 minutes. The wheezing turned into a gurgle. 3 minutes. The dog went rigid one last time, arching her back, and then she went limp. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Precious lay dead on the kitchen floor, her tongue lolling out amidst the shards of the broken bowl. I looked at the dead animal. Then I looked up at my son. "What happened to the dog, Terrence?" I asked, my voice trembling with a fear that I didn't have to fake. "Why did she die?" Terrence stared at the dog, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse himself. He looked at the empty packet peeking out of Tiffany's apron pocket, then back at the dead animal. He swallowed hard. "She had a cold," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She was sick." "It was just a seizure, Dad. Just a cold." He lied. I knew he lied. And looking into his terrified eyes, I knew he knew that I knew. That soup wasn't meant to help me sleep. It wasn't meant to make me compliant. It was meant to stop my heart. The sun rose gray and sickly over the city, matching the feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had survived the night by pushing a heavy dresser in front of my bedroom door and sleeping with one eye open, my hand under the pillow gripping the cold steel of my revolver. But morning brought a new danger. Terrence banged on my door at 7 sharp. His voice was tight with a forced cheerfulness that sounded like a violin string about to snap. "Get dressed, Dad," he shouted through the wood. "We have that appointment." I moved the dresser slowly, making enough noise to sound like an old man struggling. I opened the door and saw him. He looked worse than I did. His eyes were bloodshot and he smelled of mints, trying to cover the scent of last night's whiskey. He ushered me out to his car, a leased luxury sedan that was 2 months behind on payments. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching my cane, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood fade away. I expected us to turn toward the city center, toward the hospital district where the real doctors practiced. But Terrence turned left, toward the industrial park, toward the part of town where the streetlights were broken and the storefronts were boarded up with plywood. "Where are we going, son?" I asked, my voice trembling just the right amount. "The hospital is the other way." Terrence gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "We are going to a specialist." "Dad," he said, his eyes fixed on the road. "A private practitioner. He is the best. He will get you that certificate in no time." I looked out the window at the graffiti-stained walls and the piles of trash on the curb. A specialist. Sure, a specialist in back-alley abortions and no-questions-asked stitching. We pulled up to a brick building that looked like it had been condemned 10 years ago. There was no sign, just a metal door with peeling green paint. Terrence hurried me out of the car, looking over his shoulder as if he expected the devil himself to be following us. We walked inside. The waiting room smelled of mildew and stale cigarette smoke. There were no magazines. There was no receptionist, just a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying fly. A door opened and a man stepped out. He was wearing a white coat, but it was stained yellow at the cuffs. He was short, balding, and sweating profusely despite the chill in the room. I recognized him. Not as a doctor, but from the photos Vance had shown me. This was Doc Miller, a disgraced veterinarian who had lost his license for selling ketamine to local dealers. He was Terrence's poker buddy. "Ah," Mr. King, Miller said, wiping his damp hands on his coat. "Please come in. We have everything ready." I shuffled into the examination room. It was filthy. The exam table was covered in a sheet that looked like it hadn't been changed in a week. There were no diplomas on the wall, just a calendar from an auto parts store. "Sit down," Miller said, gesturing to the table. Terrence stood by the door, blocking the exit, his arms crossed. I sat the paper crinkling loudly under my weight. Miller moved to a metal tray. I saw a syringe. It was already filled with a clear liquid. It was a large dose, too large for a vitamin B shot, too large for anything meant to heal. I watched him tap the barrel, flicking the air bubbles to the top. The liquid swirled viscous and deadly. "What is that?" I asked, my eyes wide with feigned fear. "Just a vitamin cocktail," Miller said, his voice shaking slightly. "It will perk you up, get your blood flowing for the lawyer. It helps with memory." Terrence nodded from the doorway. "Take it, Dad. It is for your own good." I looked at the needle. Then I looked at Miller. I saw the tremors in his hands. I saw the way he licked his lips. He was terrified. He wasn't a killer. He was a desperate man doing a favor for a desperate friend. But a needle in the arm is just as deadly as a bullet in the brain. That liquid wasn't vitamins. It was likely a cocktail of adrenaline and digitalis, enough to simulate a heart attack in an old man with high blood pressure. It was the backup plan. Since the dog ate the soup, they decided to inject the poison directly. Miller approached me, the needle raised. "Roll up your sleeve, Mr. King," he said. I looked at Terrence. He was watching with a hunger that made my skin crawl. He wanted this over. He wanted his inheritance. I slowly began to unbutton my cuff. My movements were agonizingly slow. Miller shifted his weight impatiently. Come on," he muttered. I pulled my sleeve up, exposing the thin skin of my inner arm. Miller leaned in. He smelled of fear and antiseptic. He grabbed my arm to steady it. I let him find the vein. I let the tip of the needle hover millimeters from my skin. Then I moved, not with violence, but with intimacy. I leaned forward until my face was inches from his ear. I gripped his wrist with my free hand. My grip was not the grip of a frail old man. It was the grip of a man who had moved crates for 40 years. Miller froze. His eyes widened, meeting mine. "Doc." I whispered, my voice low and steady, completely devoid of the senile tremor I had been faking. "Before you push that plunger, you should know something. I sent a GPS pin to my fishing buddy about 20 minutes ago. He gets worried when I go to bad neighborhoods." Miller frowned, confused. "Your fishing buddy?" he asked. "Yes," I said, tightening my grip on his wrist until I felt his bones grind. "His name is Sheriff Patterson. He is on his way here right now to have a cup of coffee with us. And he is bringing the drug dogs." The color drained from Miller's face so fast I thought he might faint. The needle slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the metal tray. He jerked his arm back, breaking my hold, and stumbled away from me, crashing into a cabinet of glass jars. "Sheriff," he squeaked. "You called the sheriff." He turned to Terrence, his eyes bulging. "You said he was senile. You said he did not know what day it was. He knows the sheriff, Terrence. You brought a man who is friends with the cops to my clinic. Are you trying to get me killed?" Terrence looked from me to Miller, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "He is lying," he shouted. He doesn't know how to use a smartphone. I took it from him. I smiled. A cold, hard smile. I have more than one phone, son. Miller grabbed Terrence by the lapels of his jacket and shoved him toward the door. "Get out!" he screamed. "Get him out of here right now. I am not going to jail for you. Take your dad and your debts and get out before the cops show up." He opened the back door of the clinic and practically threw us out into the alleyway. "Get out!" he yelled again, slamming the heavy metal door and locking it with a resounding thunk. We were left standing in the garbage-strewn alley, the sound of distant sirens playing tricks on Terrence's mind. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw something other than a victim. He saw a threat. But he was too deep in his own delusion to see the whole picture. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with bruising force. He dragged me toward the car, his breathing ragged and heavy. He threw me into the passenger seat and slammed the door so hard the car shook. He stomped around to the driver's side and got in, hitting the steering wheel with his fists. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. He screamed a wordless sound of pure frustration. Then he turned to me. His face was twisted, his eyes burning with a hate that had no bottom. "Fine," he hissed, starting the engine and peeling out of the alley. "You want to play games, old man. You want to be difficult. We tried to do this the easy way. We tried to be nice, but you leave me no choice. Tonight you sign those papers. I do not care if I have to break every finger on your hand to make you hold the pen. We are doing this the hard way." We drove back to my house in a silence that felt heavier than the humid air outside. Terrence drove with his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds as if he expected the sheriff to materialize out of the asphalt. I sat in the passenger seat watching the familiar neighborhood roll by. The oak trees I had planted 30 years ago. The mailboxes I knew by name. We turned the corner onto my street and my stomach dropped. There in the middle of my front lawn, driven right into the heart of Esther's prize-winning hydrangea bushes, was a sign. It was bright red and aggressive. "For sale by owner. Cash only." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the driveway. There was a sensible silver station wagon parked there. Standing on the porch was a young white couple holding hands, looking up at the eaves of my home. They looked hopeful. They looked innocent. And standing in front of them, blocking the door to my sanctuary, was a real estate agent I did not recognize. No, wait. It wasn't an agent. It was Tiffany. She was wearing a floral dress and holding a clipboard pointing at the roof and smiling that shark smile. Terrence didn't even slow down until we were right on top of them. He swerved onto the grass, leaving deep black tire tracks in the green lawn Esther had tended so carefully. The disrespect took my breath away. They weren't just killing me, they were erasing me. They were selling the walls that held my memories before my body was even cold. I stepped out of the car, and the humidity hit me, but it was Tiffany's voice that made me sweat. She was speaking loud and fast, her voice pitching up in that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Oh yes," she was saying. "It has great bones. A real fixer-upper but full of charm. We are letting it go for a steal because we need a quick closing." The young husband looked at the peeling paint on the porch railing. "Why is the price so low?" he asked. "It seems too good to be true." Tiffany let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Well, to be honest," she said, leaning in confidentially, "my father-in-law is moving to a specialized memory care facility next week. It is very sad, really. He has become quite unmanageable. Dangerous even. We need the cash to pay for his treatment. We already have a bed waiting for him. We just need a cash deposit today to hand over the keys on Monday." I stood by the car door trembling, not from age. From a rage so pure it felt like fire in my veins. She was selling my life. She was selling the room where I held Esther when she cried. She was selling the kitchen where we danced on Sundays. And she was doing it for a cash deposit she would likely spend on a handbag before the sun went down. The young woman looked sympathetic. "Oh, that is terrible," she said. "We can write a check for $5,000 today. Is that enough to hold it?" Tiffany's eyes lit up like neon signs. "That would be perfect," she cooed. "Just make it out to cash. It speeds up the paperwork." I buttoned my cheap suit jacket. I adjusted my tie. I gripped my cane not for support, but as a weapon of truth. I walked across the lawn, my boots crunching on the grass my son had just ruined. Terrence tried to grab my elbow, hissing at me to get inside, but I shook him off with a strength that surprised him. I walked right up to the young couple. I did not look like a senile old man. I looked like a man who had run a warehouse floor for 40 years. I looked them dead in the eye. "Do not write that check, son," I said, my voice booming across the yard. The husband froze his pen, hovering over the checkbook. He looked at me, then at Tiffany. "Why not?" he asked. "Because this house is not for sale," I said, my voice steady and hard. "And even if it was, you would not want it. The foundation is eaten through with termites. The whole thing is held up by prayer and cheap paint, and you should know about the kitchen. My son just killed the family dog in there yesterday because it had rabies. The blood is still under the fridge." I pointed at Terrence with my cane. He is not grieving. He is cleaning up a crime scene. The color drained from the young woman's face. She looked at the house as if it were haunted. She grabbed her husband's arm. "We are leaving," she whispered. The husband didn't argue. He shoved the checkbook into his pocket and they ran for their station wagon. They peeled out of the driveway faster than Terrence had pulled in. Tiffany screamed. It was a primal sound of pure fury. She flew off the porch, her carefully constructed mask shattering. "You ruined it!" she shrieked. Her fingers curled into claws. "You ruin everything, you useless old leech!" She lunged at me, scratching at my face, drawing blood on my cheek. Terrence stepped in and slapped her hard. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Shut up!" he yelled. "Get inside before the neighbors call the cops." He grabbed the front of my shirt and pulled me close, his breath hot and reeking of fear. "You pushed me too far, old man," he hissed. "The games are over. Tonight you sign those papers or you are going to meet Mom a lot sooner than you planned." The sun went down, but the heat stayed trapped inside the house like a fever. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of cheap whiskey and fear. Terrence didn't bother locking me in the bedroom anymore. He sat in the middle of the living room in my favorite armchair, the one Tiffany hadn't destroyed yet. On his lap lay a 12-gauge shotgun. It was old, rusted at the barrel, something he'd picked up at a pawn shop years ago for hunting trips he never took. He was cleaning it, running an oily rag over the stock with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound of metal on cloth was the only noise in the room, a rhythmic whisper of violence. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the wall, his eyes glazed and distant. He had stopped pretending. The mask of the grieving son, the concerned caregiver, it was all gone. What was left was a man pushed into a corner, a man who saw no way out but through me. I sat on the edge of my bed in the darkened room down the hall. The door was open a crack, just enough to see the sliver of light from the hallway. I could hear Tiffany moving around in the dining room. The sound of packing tape being ripped from the roll was sharp and loud in the quiet house. Rip, smooth, rip, smooth. She was packing. Not clothes, not memories. She was packing the silver. She was taking down the oil paintings Esther had collected over 30 years. She was wrapping the flat-screen TV in bubble wrap. I heard her muttering to herself a low stream of curses and calculations. She wasn't planning on sticking around to care for a senile father-in-law. She was liquidating. She was getting ready to run the moment the money hit the account. She would leave Terrence to deal with the mess, to deal with the body. I knew her type. She was a survivor, a parasite who would detach and find a new host the moment the current one dried up. She didn't care about Terrence. She didn't care about the debt. She just wanted her cut before the ship went down. The phone rang. It wasn't the house phone. It was Terrence's cell sitting on the coffee table next to a half-empty bottle of bourbon. The ringtone was loud, jarring in the tense silence. Terrence didn't answer it right away. He let it ring. 1, 2, 3 times. Then he picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. He put it on speaker, maybe out of habit, maybe because he wanted me to hear, to know why he was about to do what he was about to do. "Marco," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, I just need a few more hours." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and terrifying. "Terrence," the voice said, "you are out of hours. My associates are on their way. They have instructions. If the money is not in the account by 9 a.m., they start with your knees. Then they move up. Do you understand?" The line went dead. Terrence stared at the phone. He took a long pull from the bottle, the amber liquid spilling down his chin. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. His eyes were red-rimmed wild. He stood up, the shotgun clutched in his hand. He swayed slightly, the alcohol and the terror mixing into a dangerous cocktail. He looked down the hall right at my door. I heard his footsteps heavy and uneven on the floorboards. He was coming. I reached under the mattress, my fingers brushing the cold steel of my own revolver. But I didn't pull it out. Not yet. I needed him close. I needed him to commit. The door to my room burst open, slamming against the wall with a force that cracked the plaster. Terrence stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. He looked like a monster from a child's nightmare. In one hand he held the shotgun, the barrel pointed at my chest. In the other he crumpled a piece of paper. It was the power of attorney form, the one Solomon Gold had left. "Sign it," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Sign it now, old man. Or I swear to God I will paint this room with your brains." The barrel of the shotgun looked like a tunnel into the afterlife. It was dark and smelled of gun oil and old rust. I stared right down the center of it. I did not blink. I did not look away. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It was the rhythm of a man who had made his peace with death a long time ago in a jungle far away from here. Terrence was shaking. The tremors started in his hands and worked their way up his arms until his whole body was vibrating with a mixture of bourbon and adrenaline. He looked pathetic. He looked dangerous. He looked like a stranger wearing my son's face. The paper crinkled in his fist. "Sign it," he screamed again. "Sign the paper and I will let you live. I will put you in a home. You will be safe. Just sign the damn paper." I looked from the gun to his eyes. They were bloodshot, swimming in tears and rage. He was breaking apart at the seams. I knew I had to push him. I needed him to say it. I needed the recording device hidden under the floorboard to catch every syllable of his sin. I leaned back on the mattress, resting my weight on my elbows. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my soul for 3 days. Why did you kill your mother, Terrence? Why did you murder the woman who gave you life? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Terrence flinched as if I had slapped him. The shotgun dipped for a second, then snapped back up. "Shut up," he hissed. "You do not know what you are talking about." "I know about the pills," I said, my voice calm and low. "I know you switched them. I know you watched her die." "Why, son? Was the money worth it?" Terrence let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. He lowered the gun slightly, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. "You want to know why he shouted? You really want to know?" "Because she was a miser. She was sitting on millions, Dad. Millions. And she watched me drown. She watched me struggle to pay my lease. She watched me borrow from Marco. She knew I was in debt. She knew I was scared. And what did she do? She lectured me. She told me I needed to be responsible. She told me she was cutting me off." He stopped pacing and pointed the gun at my face again. His expression was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "She found out about the gambling. She found my ledger. She said she was going to change the trust. She said she was going to leave it all to charity. Can you believe that? She was going to give my inheritance to strangers while her own son was getting his knees broken by loan sharks. She was selfish, Dad. She was cruel." He took a swig from the bottle of bourbon he had dragged in with him, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. "I didn't want to hurt her." He slurred the alcohol, loosening his tongue just as we had hoped. "I just needed time. I needed the money now. It was easy. She was old. Her heart was weak. All I did was give her a little push. I switched the beta blockers for the stimulants. It wasn't poison. It was just medicine. If she had been stronger, she would have survived. It is her fault she was weak. It is her fault she was stingy. She forced my hand. She made me do it. I listened to every word. I etched them into my memory. He was blaming her. He was blaming the victim for his own crime. He was a coward, a greedy, entitled coward who thought the world owed him a living. He didn't see a mother. He saw a bank account. He didn't see a murder. He saw a transaction. He threw the paper onto the bed next to me. He tossed a cheap ballpoint pen down beside it. "Enough talking," he growled. "I am done explaining myself to you. Marco is coming at 9. I need this signed and notarized by my guy before he gets here. Sign it, old man. Sign it, or I swear I will pull this trigger and tell the police it was a suicide. I will tell them you couldn't live without Mom. It will be poetic." I looked at the paper. It was the power of attorney document giving Terrence full control over all my assets and future assets. It was the key to the kingdom he thought he had won. I looked at the pen. It was a blue Bic bitten at the cap. I reached out and picked it up. My hand did not shake. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the final move. I sat up slowly, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. Terrence took a step back, keeping the gun leveled at my chest. "That is it," he said, his voice trembling with anticipation. "Just sign the line at the bottom. Then it is all over." I placed the paper on the nightstand. I smoothed out the wrinkles he had made. I clicked the pen. I looked up at him one last time. I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to remember the look of triumph in his eyes before I destroyed him. I did not sign my name. I did not write Booker King. I pressed the tip of the pen into the paper hard enough to tear the fiber. I wrote in big block letters. I wrote 4 words. I know what you did. I put the pen down. I picked up the paper. I held it up so he could see it. Terrence squinted in the dim light. He leaned forward, lowering the shotgun slightly. He read the words. His lips moved silently, forming the shapes. I know what you did. He froze. The triumph vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a look of absolute confusion and then dawning horror. He looked at the paper, then at my eyes. He saw the soldier there. He saw the man who had hunted him. He realized in that split second that I wasn't senile. I wasn't confused. I wasn't a victim. He realized he had confessed to a sane man. A guttural roar of rage erupted from his throat. He raised the shotgun, aiming it directly at my head. His finger tightened on the trigger. The metal clicked as he took up the slack. I stared into the black hole of the barrel and I did not blink. Then the world exploded. There was a deafening crash from the front of the house, the sound of heavy wood splintering and metal hinges tearing from the frame. It sounded like a bomb going off. The front door had been breached. Terrence flinched his head, snapping toward the hallway. Beams of blinding white light cut through the darkness of the house, slicing into the bedroom like lasers. A voice amplified by a megaphone boomed through the shattered door, shaking the walls. Police, drop the weapon. Drop it now. We have the house surrounded. Terrence looked back at me, his eyes wide with the realization that his time had run out. But he didn't drop the gun. He panicked. He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and hauled me up, using my body as a shield against the inevitable justice coming down the hall. The room exploded with light that was brighter than the sun, and it wasn't just the hallway anymore because beams cut through the bedroom windows, shattering the glass with the sheer intensity of the sound waves from the megaphone. This is the police. We have the house surrounded. Drop the weapon and come out with your hands up. The voice was God-like, shaking the floorboards and rattling the pictures on the walls. I saw the dust motes dancing in the beams of light like spirits disturbed from their rest. Terrence flinched, his grip on my shirt tightening until I thought the cheap fabric would tear right off my back. He looked around wildly, a trapped animal, realizing the cage had no door and the hunter was already inside. The shotgun wavered in his hand, and for a second I thought he might drop it. I thought he might surrender and end this nightmare with some shred of dignity. But desperation does strange things to a man. It turns fear into aggression and panic into violence. He didn't drop the gun. Instead, he screamed a raw, primal sound of denial that tore at his throat. He wasn't ready to give up his inheritance. He wasn't ready to face the consequences of his sins. The light blinded us both, turning the room into a high-contrast nightmare of shadows and glare, and I squinted against the brilliance, my heart pounding a war drum in my chest. This was it. The cavalry had arrived, and Thorne had kept his promise. But now I was in the line of fire, and the bullet was already in the chamber. I heard a commotion from the back of the house, a sudden crash, and the sound of shouting. It was Tiffany. I could picture it perfectly. She had probably grabbed the bag of silver and made a run for the kitchen door the moment the first siren wailed, because she was a survivor, a rat leaving the sinking ship before the water even touched her toes. But she didn't make it far. I heard her scream, a high-pitched shriek of indignation and terror that cut through the noise of the sirens. Then came a voice I recognized, and it wasn't a cop, it was Alistair Thorne. "Going somewhere, Mrs. King," his voice boomed, magnified by the silence between sirens. "I believe the police have some questions about a poisoned dog and a forged check." She was caught. Thorne had his private security team covering the exits. The police missed. There was no way out. Terrence heard it too. He heard his wife being cornered. He heard his world collapsing around him. He looked at me, and his eyes were void of anything human. They were black pits of panic. He spun me around, slamming my back against his chest, hooking his arm around my neck, cutting off my air. He jammed the barrel of the shotgun against my temple, and the metal was hot now, heated by his feverish grip. "Back off," he screamed at the empty doorway, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I will kill him. I swear I will kill him. Get back or I blow his head off." He dragged me into the hallway, using my body as a shield, my feet dragging on the carpet. I smelled his sweat acrid and sour. I felt his heart hammering against my back, a frantic, erratic rhythm. He was strong with the strength of the insane, pushing me toward the living room, toward the lights, thinking he could bargain his way out of a murder charge. "I want a car," he yelled at the windows. "I want a clear path or the old man dies." He forgot who he was holding. He forgot that before I was a warehouse manager, before I was a husband, I was a sergeant in a platoon that saw things no man should see. He thought he held a frail old man. He thought he held a victim. He was wrong. We stepped into the blinding white light of the living room, and the glare hit Terrence full in the face. He blinked momentarily disoriented, his grip loosening just a fraction as he tried to shield his eyes from the assault. That was the mistake, that was the opening I had been waiting for. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just reacted. Muscle memory buried under 40 years of peace surged to the surface, instant and lethal. I dropped my weight, suddenly making myself heavy as lead. As he stumbled forward to compensate, I drove my right elbow back with every ounce of strength I possessed. It connected perfectly with his solar plexus, a solid meat-on-bone impact. I felt the air leave his lungs in a wet whoosh. He doubled over the shotgun barrel, dipping toward the floor. I spun around, grabbing the barrel with my left hand and his wrist with my right. I twisted with a violent torque. A sharp snap echoed as his finger broke inside the trigger guard. He screamed in pain. I ripped the weapon from his hands and swept his legs out from under him with a kick that would have shattered a younger man's knee. He hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of him. Terrence lay on the floor, gasping for air, clutching his broken hand, his face a mask of agony and shock. I stood over him. The shotgun felt natural in my hands, heavy and familiar, like an old friend returned. I pumped the action, ejecting a shell that spun through the air in slow motion and clattered onto the hardwood. I leveled the barrel at his forehead. He looked up at me, and for the first time he saw the truth. He saw the father who had protected him, and the soldier who could end him. I tightened my finger on the trigger. The rage was a roaring fire demanding blood. Then the front door burst inward with a shower of splinters. Men in tactical gear swarmed the room, weapons raised. "Mr. King, don't shoot," a voice shouted. "Drop the weapon. Mr. King, do not do it." The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed with a low electric buzz that drilled into my skull, but it was nothing compared to the silence on the other side of the glass. I sat in the observation room, my hands resting on my cane, watching my son through the one-way mirror. Terrence was handcuffed to the metal table. His right hand was splinted and bandaged where I had broken his finger, a stark white reminder of our struggle. He looked small in that chair. The expensive suit was rumpled and stained with sweat and dust. He was leaning forward, speaking to the detective with a frantic energy that reeked of desperation. I could hear every word through the speaker system. He was admitting to the assault. He admitted to threatening me with the shotgun. He called it a breakdown. He called it a moment of grief-induced insanity. But when the detective asked about Esther, he shut down. He shook his head violently, denying everything. "My mother died of a heart attack," he insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "She was old. Her heart was weak. I loved her. I would never hurt her. You have nothing on me for that. Nothing." I watched him lie. I watched the boy I had raised, the man I had protected, twist the truth until it snapped. He thought he was smart. He thought that without a body, without a weapon, he could talk his way out of a murder charge. He thought the threats in the house were just words against words. He didn't know about the floorboard. He didn't know about the technology of a bygone era that had been recording his every breath. The door to the interrogation room opened, and the air in the observation booth seemed to get colder. Solomon Gold walked in. He didn't look like a lawyer in that moment. He looked like an executioner in a three-piece suit. He carried no briefcase. He held no files. In his hand, he carried a single object. My old Nokia brick phone. It was scratched and worn, a relic from a time when phones were tools, not toys. Terrence looked up at him, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I want my lawyer." Gold didn't answer. He didn't sit down. He walked to the table and placed the phone in the center of the metal surface. The device looked out of place like a stone on a dinner plate. Gold pressed a button. The screen glowed a dull green. He looked at Terrence, and for the first time I saw fear flicker in my son's eyes, a primal understanding that the trap had snapped shut. Gold pressed play. The audio was tinny but crystal clear in the acoustically tiled room. My voice came through first calm and steady, asking the question that had started it all. "Why did you kill your mother, Terrence?" Then came the silence. And then Terrence's voice filled the room, It was the voice of the man in the bedroom, the voice of the monster. Because she was a miser. She was sitting on millions, Dad. She forced my hand. I switched the beta blockers for the stimulants. It wasn't poison. It was just medicine. If she had been stronger, she would have survived. Terrence stopped breathing. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the table. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ashen. The recording continued, playing his justification, his blame, his confession. Every word was a nail in his coffin. He slumped back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked at the mirror. He looked right at where I was sitting. He couldn't see me, but he knew I was there. He knew I had played him. He knew that the senile old man he had tried to rob had been 2 steps ahead of him the entire time. Gold stopped the recording. He didn't say a word. He just picked up the phone, turned around, and walked out of the room, leaving Terrence alone with the echo of his own sins. My son put his head on the table and began to sob. It wasn't the crying of a remorseful man. It was the weeping of a man who realized his life was over. The door to the observation room opened and Detective Johnson stepped in. He looked tired, but satisfied. He held a file in his hand. He nodded toward the glass where Terrence was now rocking back and forth. "We have him, Mr. King," he said quietly. "That recording is admissible. It proves premeditation. It proves motive. But that is not all." He opened the file and laid a transcript on the console in front of me. "We have been questioning your daughter-in-law in the next room. She didn't hold up as well as he did. The moment we told her we had the recording of Terrence, she cracked. She is singing like a canary to save her own skin. She confessed to everything, Mr. King. She admitted to opening the credit cards in your name. She admitted to the identity theft. She admitted to poisoning the dog to test the powder. And most importantly, she gave a sworn statement that she witnessed Terrence throwing away the real heart medication and replacing it with the stimulants. She said he bragged about it. She said he called it the perfect crime." I looked down at the transcript. Tiffany's words were there in black and white, confirming every horror I had suspected. She was throwing him to the wolves to get a plea deal. There was no loyalty among thieves. There was no love in that house, just greed and survival. I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. It was the finality of it. My family was gone. My wife was murdered. My son was a killer. My daughter-in-law was an accomplice. I was the last one standing in the ruins of the King legacy. Detective Johnson cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He closed the file and looked me in the eye. "There is one more thing, Mr. King," he said, his voice grave. "The recording and the testimony are strong. But to secure a conviction for first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt, we need physical evidence. We need to prove that the stimulants were in her system. We need to prove that it wasn't a natural heart attack." I knew what was coming. I had known it since the moment Thorne showed me the photos, but hearing it out loud didn't make it any easier. "We need to exhume Esther's body," Johnson said softly. "We need to run a toxicology screen. I know this is asking a lot. I know you just buried her. But we need your permission to bring her back up." I looked through the glass at my son. He was broken, defeated, but he was still alive. Esther was in the cold ground because of him. She didn't get to say goodbye. She didn't get to see Paris. She died scared and betrayed in her own kitchen. If bringing her up meant keeping him down, then it was what I had to do. I gripped my cane. I thought of the woman who had stood by me for 45 years. I thought of the justice she deserved. "Do it," I said, my voice hard as stone. "Dig her up, find the poison, and bury him with it." The morning they dug up my wife, the sky was the color of a bruise. I stood at the edge of the cemetery plot, leaning heavy on my cane while the machinery roared. It was a profane sound, a backhoe tearing into the earth where I had laid her to rest only a week before. Every scoop of dirt felt like a physical blow to my own body. I had spent 45 years protecting Esther. I walked on the sidewalk side of the street. I checked the locks at night. I made sure her car had oil. My one job was to keep her safe, and I had failed. I let a wolf live in our house, and now I was failing her again by disturbing her peace. I watched the metal teeth of the bucket bite into the soil, and I had to close my eyes. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Alistair Thorne. He sat in his wheelchair beside me, his face pale but his eyes steady. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me it was going to be okay. He just sat there bearing witness to the horror, because he loved her too. We waited in the cold morning air until the casket was raised. It looked wrong in the light of day, muddy and scarred. They loaded it into a white van without ceremony. I followed that van to the medical examiner's office, driving my truck with a numbness that spread from my fingers to my heart. We sat in a sterile waiting room that smelled of floor wax and formaldehyde. The hours dragged by like years. I stared at a crack in the linoleum floor, trying not to imagine what was happening behind the double doors. I tried not to think about the scalpel. I tried not to think about my Esther being cut open again. Thorne read a newspaper, but he never turned the page. We were two old men keeping a vigil for a woman who deserved better than this. I thought about Terrence sitting in a holding cell. I hoped he was cold. I hoped he was scared. I hoped he knew that every second the clock ticked, the noose was getting tighter. Detective Johnson pushed open the double doors at 2 in the afternoon. He held a clipboard against his chest and his face was grim. He did not look like a man who had good news, but he looked like a man who had answers. He sat down opposite us and placed a clear plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside was a printout of a toxicology graph. The lines spiked high and sharp red peaks on a white grid. "We have the results," Johnson said, his voice low and professional. The medical examiner found massive concentrations of ephedrine and caffeine in her blood work, along with traces of a synthetic amphetamine usually found in diet pills from the 90s. "It was not a natural heart attack, Mr. King." Her heart didn't fail. It was exploded. The dosage was 10 times the safe limit for a healthy adult. For a woman with her condition, it was a death sentence within an hour of ingestion. I looked at the graph. It was just ink on paper, but it represented the moment my wife died. I could see it. I could see her taking her morning pills, trusting they would keep her alive. I could see her feeling the racing pulse, the panic, the tightness in her chest. I could see her reaching for the phone that Terrence had likely unplugged. Johnson tapped the paper. "We ran a comparison against the residue found in the vial your investigator pulled from the trash. It is a match. A perfect chemical match. We also found traces of the same substance in the upholstery of your son's car. He must have spilled some when he was mixing it. It is conclusive. We have the weapon. We have the opportunity. We have the motive. And thanks to your recording, we have the confession." The numbness in my body evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard weight of finality. It was real. It wasn't a suspicion. It wasn't a nightmare. My son murdered my wife. He poisoned her. He watched her die. And he did it for money he owed to thugs. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Just one. I wiped it away angrily. I looked at Thorne. He nodded slowly. His eyes were wet too. "We got him, Booker," he whispered. "We got the bastard." By 5 o'clock, the district attorney had filed the paperwork. The charges were read out loud in the precinct briefing room, and I listened to every word. Terrence King was charged with murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, grand larceny, fraud. The list went on a litany of sins that would bury him for the rest of his natural life. Tiffany was charged as an accessory to murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The judge denied bail immediately. They were deemed flight risks. They were deemed dangers to society. They were remanded to the county jail until trial. I saw them on the news that evening. They were doing the perp walk. Terrence was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed with his pale, terrified skin. He looked at the cameras, and for a second he looked right at me through the screen. He didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked like a child who realized the dark was real. Tiffany was crying, hiding her face with her hands. Her hair was a mess. Her designer life was over. They were going to die in prison. It was justice. But it didn't bring Esther back. It didn't fill the empty side of the bed. It just closed the book on the ugliest chapter of my life. I sat in the waiting room of the station feeling empty. The adrenaline was gone, leaving me hollowed out. I was an old man with no wife and no son. I was alone. Solomon Gold walked in. He looked fresh despite the long day. He carried a thick manila envelope under his arm. He sat down next to me. "Mr. King," he said softly, "the legal matter of the criminal case is now in the hands of the state, but there is still the matter of the estate." I looked at him wearily. "I don't care about the money, Solomon. Burn it. Give it away. I don't want a dime of the money that killed her." Gold shook his head. "You need to see this." He opened the envelope and pulled out a document bonded in blue paper. The will we showed Terrence was a draft. It was a decoy designed to flush him out. Esther wrote another one. A final one. She wrote it the day she hired the investigator. She knew Booker. She knew it might come to this. She left instructions that were only to be revealed once the threat was neutralized. He placed the document in my hands. It was heavy. "Read it, Booker." read what she really wanted. I opened the blue legal folder Solomon Gold placed in my hands, and the paper inside felt heavier than a Bible. It was not the cold-typed text of a standard will. The first page was a handwritten letter on the creamy stationery Esther kept in her vanity drawer for special occasions. I recognized the slant of her penmanship immediately, the way she crossed her T's with a little flourish. I traced the ink with my thumb, feeling the texture of the woman I had lost. My throat tightened so hard it hurt to swallow. I began to read, and it was like hearing her voice in the quiet room, a whisper from the grave that was both comforting and terrifying. "My dearest Booker," she wrote, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it likely means I did not go peacefully. I have kept secrets from you, my love, not because I did not trust you, but because I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to live a simple life, a life without the burden of wealth and the vultures it attracts. But I failed, Booker. I failed because the vulture was already in our nest. I have watched our son Terrence change over the years. I watched him turn from a sweet boy into a man consumed by envy and greed. I saw the way he looked at us, not with love, but with calculation. I found his gambling slips. I found the forged checks. The fruit has rotted on the vine, Booker, and I fear the rot has reached the core. I hid the money to keep him from destroying himself, but now I fear he will destroy us to get to it. If I die under suspicious circumstances, do not trust him. Do not mourn me yet. Go to Alistair Thorne. He holds the key to everything. He is the only one I trust to help you navigate the storm that will follow my death. I love you, Booker. You were my soldier in life, and I know you will be my soldier after I am gone. Fight for us. Fight for the truth." I lowered the letter. A single tear escaped my eye and landed on the paper, blurring the word soldier. She knew. She had lived in terror in her own home, watching her son turn into a monster, and she had faced it with a quiet dignity that broke my heart. She had prepared for her own murder because she knew Terrence better than I did. She knew he was capable of the unthinkable. I looked up at Solomon Gold. He was watching me with a solemn expression, his hands folded on the table. "She was a remarkable woman, Mr. King," he said softly. "She came to me 6 months ago to draft this. She was very specific about her wishes. She wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, justice would be served." Gold turned the page to the formal legal document. "This is the last will and testament of Esther King," he announced, his voice shifting into a professional cadence. "It supersedes all previous documents, including the draft we showed your son. Article 1 regarding the disposition of assets to immediate family. To my son, Terrence King, I leave the sum of $1 US. I stared at the document. $1. It was not an oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated insult. In the eyes of the law, leaving him nothing might allow him to argue he was forgotten by mistake. Leaving him $1 meant she remembered him. She considered him, and she decided that was exactly what he was worth. It was a final slap in the face from the grave, a message that she saw him for exactly what he was. Article 2 Gold continued. To my daughter-in-law, Tiffany King, I leave absolutely nothing. I leave her with the knowledge that her greed yielded no reward. Article 3 regarding the residuary estate. To my husband, Booker King, I leave the entirety of my estate, real and personal. This includes the primary residence on Elm Street, the contents of all safety deposit boxes, the investment portfolio managed by Thorne Industries, and the liquid assets held in the offshore trust totaling $3,200,000. $3 million. The number was staggering. It was a fortune that could have bought us a life of luxury. We could have traveled. We could have bought a house by the ocean. We could have lived like kings. Instead, we lived in a drafty house with a son who plotted our demise because we were too afraid to show our hand. The money didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like blood money. It felt like the price of my wife's life. I looked at the numbers on the page, and all I could see was the vial of poison. All I could see was Terrence's face as he watched her die. Mr. King Gold said, pulling me out of my thoughts, "The assets are yours. They are already transferred to your name. You can do whatever you wish with them. You can buy a yacht. You can burn it. It is yours." I stood up and walked to the window of the police station. Outside, the city was moving on. People were walking their dogs, driving to work, living lives that hadn't been shattered by betrayal. I thought about the house on Elm Street. I thought about the kitchen where Precious died. I thought about the bedroom where Terrence held a shotgun to my head. I thought about the living room where Tiffany ripped apart the sofa. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. It was a mausoleum of bad memories and spilled blood. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't sleep in that bed. I couldn't eat in that kitchen. The walls had absorbed the hate and the fear, and no amount of paint would ever cover it up. Sell it, I said without turning around. Sell the house. I do not care what you get for it. Just get rid of it. I never want to step foot inside that place again. Sell the furniture. Sell the car. Sell everything that reminds me of them. And the money, Gold asked. What do you want to do with the $3 million? I turned to face him. I thought about the letters I had received during my live stream. I thought about the thousands of other old folks sitting in their paid-off houses afraid of their own children. I thought about the people who didn't have an Alistair Thorne to watch their backs. I don't want it, I said firmly. I have my pension. I have my truck. That is enough for me. But I am not going to burn it. Esther worked too hard for it. She earned every penny. We are going to use it to fight back. I want to start a foundation, Solomon. The Esther King Foundation. I want to hire lawyers for elderly people who are being abused by their families. I want to hire private investigators to expose the greedy children waiting for their inheritance. I want to pay for safe housing for seniors who need to escape. I want every dime of that $3 million to be used to stop people like Terrence. Gold smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. That is a noble legacy, Mr. King. Esther would be proud. I will draw up the paperwork immediately. I left the station with the folder under my arm. I had one last thing to do. One last loose end to tie off before I could truly be free. I got into my truck and drove not toward the city, but out onto the highway toward the state correctional facility. The road was long and straight, and the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violent orange and bruising purple. I pulled up to the gate of the prison. The razor wire glinted in the dying light. I showed my ID. I went through the metal detectors. I walked down the long gray corridor that smelled of bleach and misery. I sat in the visitation booth on the secure side of the glass. I waited. 5 minutes later, the door on the other side opened. A guard let him in. Terrence was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. He had lost 20 pounds. His head was shaved. His eyes were hollow, sunk deep into his skull. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and fallen in. He sat down and picked up the receiver. His hand was shaking. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad, you came." I picked up the phone. I looked at him. I didn't see my son. I didn't see the baby I held. I saw a stranger. "I came to give you something," I said. I held up the blue folder. I pressed the page against the glass. "Read it. Terrence, Article 1. He squinted. He read the line. "To my son Terrence King, I leave the sum of $1. He started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. He pressed his forehead against the glass. "Dad, please," he begged. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Please help me. I am scared." I watched him cry. I felt nothing. The well was dry. I stood up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single crisp $1 bill. I slid it through the slot in the metal tray. "Here is your inheritance, son," I said. "Don't spend it all in one place." I hung up the phone. I turned my back on his weeping face. I walked out of the prison and into the cool night air. I took a deep breath. For the first time in months, my lungs filled completely. I was alone. But I was free. The glass partition in the prison visitation room was smeared with fingerprints and the grease of 1,000 desperate foreheads, but through it I saw my son clearer than I ever had in my life. Terrence clutched the single-dollar bill I had slid through the tray as if it were a lifeline. His tears had stopped leaving tracks through the grime on his face. Now his eyes were wide with a frantic, realizing panic. He pressed his face close to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. "Dad, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice tinny through the receiver. "You have to help me with a lawyer. The public defender is useless. He says I am looking at life without parole. You have the money now. You have millions. Just get me a good attorney. We can fight this. We can say it was an accident. We can say I was under duress. Please, Dad. You cannot let your own son rot in here." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had poisoned his mother. I looked at the man who had held a shotgun to my head. I looked for a spark of the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive. I looked for the young man. I walked down the aisle. They were all gone, consumed by the creature sitting in front of me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a bailout. He was still trying to hustle me. He still thought I was the mark. I leaned forward. My voice was calm, devoid of the rage that had fueled me for weeks. "I am not your dad," I said simply. "Your father died that night in the bedroom. He died when you pointed a loaded weapon at his chest. He died when you decided a gambling debt was worth more than his life. The man sitting here is just a witness to your crimes." Terrence recoiled as if I had struck him. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the dollar bill in his hand, then back at me. Hate began to replace the fear in his eyes, a pure, venomous hatred. "I hope you die alone," he spat. "I hope you rot with that money." "I already died alone, Terrence," I replied. "I died the night I realized I raised a killer. But I came back, and now I am going to live." I hung up the phone. It clicked into the cradle with a sound of finality that echoed in my bones. I did not look back. I stood up and walked out of the booth, leaving him screaming silent curses behind the soundproof glass. I walked down the long gray corridor, past the guards, past the gates, and out into the world. I took a breath of air that tasted like rain and gasoline and freedom. It was over. The book was closed. 1 year later, the air tasted of roasted chestnuts and expensive perfume. The Seine River flowed beneath me, dark and silky, reflecting the lights of a city that burned with a golden fire. I stood on the deck of a private riverboat, the wind ruffling the hem of my cashmere coat. I was 73 years old, but I felt younger than I had at 50. I was not wearing my old warehouse uniform. I was wearing a bespoke navy suit tailored in London. My shoes were Italian leather. My cane was made of polished ebony with a silver handle. I looked like a man who owned the world, or at least a significant part of it. Paris. Esther had talked about Paris for 40 years. She had magazines' cutouts of the Eiffel Tower taped inside her pantry door. She watched old French movies on Sunday afternoons, whispering the dialogue she didn't understand. She saved her pennies in a jar marked Paris Fund, but the jar was always emptied for braces for tuition for bail. She never made it. She spent her life serving others, cleaning up their messes, making their lives beautiful while hers remained small. But she was here now. I felt her in the breeze. I felt her in the warmth of the setting sun. I looked out at the architecture, the bridges, the lovers, walking hand in hand along the quay. It was everything she had imagined and more. I wasn't just seeing it for me. I was seeing it for us. The Esther King Foundation was thriving back home. We had saved 16 seniors from abusive situations in the first 6 months. We had put 3 corrupt guardians in jail. We had recovered $5 million in stolen assets. Every victory was a tribute to her. Every person we saved was a slap in the face to men like Terrence. I had turned her tragedy into a crusade. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a warrior. I turned to the man sitting in a comfortable chair nearby. Alistair Thorne raised a glass of vintage Bordeaux. He looked healthier than he had in years, the fresh air doing him good. He had become more than a boss, more than an ally. He was my brother in arms. We fished together on weekends. We argued about baseball. We shared the silence of men who knew the cost of peace. "Ready, Booker?" he asked softly. I nodded. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. It didn't contain much, just a handful of ash. The rest of her was resting in a beautiful mausoleum back home, but this part belonged to the world. I walked to the railing. The water churned gently against the hull of the boat. I opened the pouch. I didn't say a prayer. I didn't make a speech. Esther didn't need speeches. She knew what was in my heart. I tilted the pouch. The gray dust caught the wind, swirling for a moment in the golden light before settling onto the surface of the river. It drifted away, carried by the current toward the sea, toward adventure, toward eternity. "Go see the world, my love," I whispered. "You earned it." I watched until the last speck disappeared into the dark water. A profound sense of lightness washed over me. The knot of grief that had lived in my chest for a year finally loosened. She wasn't gone. She was just everywhere. I turned back to Thorne. He handed me a glass of wine. The crystal clinked as we touched glasses. A sound of celebration, not mourning. "To Esther," Thorne said. "To Esther," I replied, "and to justice." We drank. The wine was rich and complex like the life we had lived. I looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear over the city of lights. I thought of Terrence in his cell staring at a concrete wall. I thought of Tiffany working in a diner trying to pay off her fraud restitution. I thought of the past, but then I let it go. I smiled. It wasn't the grim smile of a soldier. It wasn't the sad smile of a widower. It was the smile of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side with his soul intact. "We are free, Esther," I whispered to the wind. "We are finally free." The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of the river flowing toward the sea. This journey taught me that sharing blood doesn't mean you share a heart. For years I excused my son's greed, mistaking his manipulation for misguided ambition. I learned the hard way that true family isn't inherited. It is built through loyalty, respect, and unwavering support. I found more brotherhood in a former stranger than in the child I raised. We must stop excusing abuse just because it comes from relatives. Never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Sometimes the ultimate act of self-respect is cutting the toxic roots of your family tree to finally let the light back in. If you believe justice was served, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, would you have left Terrence $1 or nothing at all?